I am indeed pleased to introduce today's luncheon speaker, Dell's Senior Vice President and Chief Security Officer, Mr. John Scimone, who will be engaged in conversation with Mr. Francis Rose, the host of Government Matters. You've seen him on Channel 8. No doubt you've seen him in the programs that he does on TV and radio. But we are proud to bring this conversation to you, and also recognize, by the way, in the audience, Shona Nitsky, who is the new federal director, and she is with John today. Thanks for coming with us. This is kind of a reunion for John. He worked at DISA. He met his wife at a DISA event. He is back, having gone through now his service with the government, with a variety of corporations. He leads today global corporate security programs for Dell and has responsibilities spanning the full spectrum of strategy, planning, and operations, aiding Dell's businesses in the management of security risk across both the physical and cyber domains. He's also charged with the advocacy of business resilience, including crisis management, business continuity, and disaster recovery. Before joining Dell, John served as Global Chief Information Security Officer at Sony, a little company, the Sony Group family of companies, in fact. And prior to joining Sony, he held a number of leadership positions, as I mentioned, within DoD, with a focus on information security operations. A unique perspective to take a look at certainly the government business and now the corporate activities in similar vein. I think he'll add tremendously to our understanding of our theme for the program, Connect and Protect. We're also glad to have Francis Rose of Government Matters, and as I mentioned, with WJLA, ABC 7, and News Channel 8, an award-winning broadcaster, journalist, speaker, and writer, covering all three branches of the federal government as a broadcast journalist since 1998. I'd ask you, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Scimone and Mr. Rose to the stage.
Thank you all very much for your attention, and thanks very much especially to AFCEA for the invitation. John, I note that this is the first fireside chat that I've conducted without a fire.
Yeah, that's what we do in Texas. There's no need for
that's right.
fireplaces.
And in the theme of South by Southwest, I thought maybe we would just light something on fire right here. We're not going to do that, Bob. Bob Shea, see, we're getting help now. You have had a little bit of a chance at luncheon before to talk to some of your friends, former colleagues in government and in industry about what's going on in their worlds business-wise and that kind of thing. What are some of the kinds of themes that you're hearing, whether it's here on the floor or in other conversations that you're having about things that people are worried about? And conversely, what are you not hearing that they're worried about that maybe they should be thinking about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that first, thanks for the opportunity to be here today and speak to you. Thank you, General Lynn, for having us. You know, one thing that struck me in sort of splitting my career, the first half in the government, starting actually as a GS5 with DISA under General Kroom, who's here today, seeing a lot of old faces and friends. And then coming over to the private industry, I mean, the thing that has struck me in terms of differences really is speed and agility. You know, the speed at which industry is able to deliver, develop and deliver solutioning. We're not constrained, honestly, by the same things that constrain government organizations. At the same time, I truly believe, and maybe sales may not like me saying this, but a corporate partner is never going to have the same level of depth of knowledge of the mission as the agency that you're supporting. And obviously has different equities at stake than government agencies. And so it's my view, having seen a bit of both worlds, that the best is going to come when you combine both, when you partner, when you bring industry partnership to government missions, with industry solutioning, industry speed. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
So those two terms, I think, speed and agility, are interesting because I hear them in an ongoing discussion in Washington about the threat landscape in particular. And over the last 6 months or so, I would say, a lot more emphasis on insider threats and specifically on innocent insider threats. Not so much about the malignant insider threat, but about somebody who does something unintentionally, clicks on a phishing link or something like that. Are we paying the level of attention that we need to those things, even though the attention that's being paid to that kind of threat has grown?
Yeah, I think that, obviously there's been significantly increasing awareness, both in the government and industry, after, the Manning incident, certainly the Snowden incident and others on the malicious insider. And I think when you look at, trends and the vectors and the way people are getting into networks and getting into the systems, it often is, most often taking advantage of an unwitting insider. And interestingly, when you look at insider threat programs, and I have an insider threat program at Dell, as most corporations do, interestingly, you're at the same time trying to detect malicious insiders who are employees who may have malintent or not. You're equally effective in detecting, just based on looking at the behavior of the users or just the identities, people who have taken over the identities of your insiders and actually are outsiders. So I think that there's an increasing awareness of this in industry. Certainly insider threat programs generally are receiving increased funding and increasing attention. But I think what's also dawning on folks is that whereas insider threat traditionally, at least in corporations, has been treated almost as a physical security type thing, we're actually finding huge synergy with the cybersecurity unit, where we're looking at the same type of data, the same type of risk indicators, and oftentimes we think we're tracking an insider and it's really an outsider. And so one of the things that I found really beneficial at Dell is, as the CSO, I have both physical security and cybersecurity opportunities to bring converged security solutioning to bear, and also on the insider threat thread in particular. When we start thinking about product security and supply chain security, it all blends together at the end of the day, because the insiders who have access to our information also have the opportunity to taint the supply chain, either wittingly or unwittingly. So I think it's a hugely important area, and I think it is one that deserves increased attention.
So the merger, what you're talking about there is the merger of the physical security and the cybersecurity landscapes. Has that loop closed 100% in business? It sounds like it has in the portfolio that you bring. And how can government learn from that? Right now, my sense is that government has its cybersecurity operations pretty separate and distinct from its physical security operations. How can government learn from what the private sector is doing to close that?
Yeah, and to be fair and to be clear, I mean, I'd say everybody's still learning. And actually, I think if you look at many corporations, the cybersecurity outfit is sometimes still separate from physical security. What I found, though, is that with bringing the two together and bringing the two sets of tradecraft and career paths together, you have people that are essentially have brains wired the same way with entirely different but complementary skill sets. And increasingly, when we look at things like our supply chain security program and how do we deliver higher level of assurance in Dell's products as we're building the nation's critical infrastructure, it's not just about protecting the physical access to them in the factories when they're in transit going through cartel territory in Mexico, other factories and this and that. It's about the computers that are actually designing the software. It's the computers that are actually designing the compiler that compiles the software that then gets put on the product that then gets shipped to our government agencies. And so you really need converged skill sets in order to be able to attack the entire attack surface end to end and deliver higher assurance in the products that you put out. So again, I don't think anybody has it right. I think there's huge opportunity for learning and innovation in this area. But I do think that just starting with recognizing that it's increasingly a converged problem set, and that if you truly want to address end-to-end risk, you have to recognize that there are physical security and cybersecurity equities. That's a starting point.
I have a couple of more questions to throw at you, if I may, and I want you all to have an opportunity, too, to take advantage of John's knowledge and his ability to talk both industry and government. We had a slide earlier that showed you how you can submit your questions. That'll come up again, and I would like you to submit those questions because we'll go to those in just a few moments. Given the challenges that I laid out there a moment ago, that these are kind of two separate camps, government and, cybersecurity and physical security. What are the things that technology professionals in government should be thinking about physical security? What awarenesses should they have? What things should they be studying? What areas of expertise should they be developing in their own personal portfolios to be more valuable to their organizations moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was interesting. My first opportunity to preside and have the opportunity to lead a physical security program was in the Secretary of Defense's communications office, and I'm a cyber guy by background, but I found that it was actually fairly easy to pick up knowledge and understanding of physical security, counterintelligence, tradecraft, because at the end of the day, it's just bad guys and gals trying to do bad things. Mm-hmm. And the way you counter that is to often think like an attacker, know what the realm of the possible is, and then expand beyond that and think about what you don't even recognize as within the realm of the possible. I think it's entirely a learnable problem. And I think the government's already taken some really positive steps, even during my time there, in thinking about that. I mean, the government has increasingly strong policies around physical security and the dynamics as it relates to your cyber systems. I mean, if you're put in a JWICS or a CIPR terminal in a facility, you then have physical security protections around it. Starting to think about what microphones and cameras mean in classified spaces. But increasingly, I think we need to look at the full life cycle of the attack surface of the technology that we're introducing into physical scenarios, whether it's warfighting scenarios or back in the bureaucratic capital of the world here in DC. We need a high level of assurance in the technology that we're deploying, increasingly critical mission readiness and reliance on that technology, so that when the day comes where the world becomes a bit dicier than it is even today, and we potentially go up against a more technically sophisticated adversary, we have a higher level of confidence that our systems are actually going to be able to be relied upon. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the mindset that everybody in this space, in the national security space, in the technology space, the lens through which we need to be looking at these things. And so from my perspective, actually, that was one of the main reasons as I was looking at what the next chapter should be for myself. I was excited to join Dell. I had the opportunity to look at essentially the world's largest technology footprint, end-to-end footprint of technology out there in the data centers of our government, of NATO, and elsewhere, and actually be responsible for making sure that when we go to war, your systems are going to work for you. And I'm very confident that that's the case. I'm going to be able to spend some years now increasing our confidence that that's going to be able to be the case.
Militaries all over the world are thinking that way. Civilian agencies should be thinking that way too, shouldn't they?
In more so, and perhaps even more important in cases when you look at Transcom and others that we were talking about earlier, even commercial partners. If you look at your supply chain, for having an assured mission, your third party and commercial dependencies that you have, you need to have trusted partners where your security boundary, your risk boundary is actually extending to them. And so you not only have to worry about your own systems, your own networks and facilities, but those that you're going to rely on in wartime. And that's when I think we start talking about industry partnership and why it's so essential. I mean, that is it. We are hugely interdependent on each other, particularly when you look at mission risk and mission dependence.
Questions from the audience?
Yes, thank you. The first question is, as you merge various aspects of security, can you offer lessons in merging cultures to produce success?
Culture is always a challenge in all of these issues. It turns out technology is easy, people are hard, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I figured.
Harder, I guess.
No, that's what keeps me in business.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just an interesting anecdote from my own seat right now. One of the exciting times internally going on at Dell is that we just purchased EMC to make ourselves the largest private technology company on the planet. But with that came essentially a very distinct culture. Mostly guys and gals up in the Boston area, Sox fans, hoodie wearing, New England cursing Sox fans up there at EMC, mixing with, the more distinguished gentlemen down in Austin, Texas, and the culture that exists at Dell headquarters.
Yes. And distinguished, not the word I would have thought of for Austin, but that's fine.
So, I join as an outsider. I have no equities on either side, and joining, we just bought, the team came together, and I'm looking, I've got folks on both sides, and it's two distinctly different cultures, but I think the thing that has made the integration successful, at least on our team and our company generally, is having a common mission, common understanding of mission, and orienting people around the same goals, and finding that commonality, and as much as possible marginalizing the differences or making light of it where you can. And so I think we can get through different cultures. I think, though, it takes listening, in particular listening more than talking. And when we look at the cultural differences between industry and the government, which I again have seen distinctly, even in my last job at Sony as a very young white guy in a multinational Japanese conglomerate, I saw the two sides of the fence and very distinct cultural clashes. I think that when you find commonality in mission, you listen, you can come together and get stuff done. And I think the government and private industry can do that, and I think we have to do that.
So you're obviously not a Red Sox fan.
I am actually from Boston. I love the Sox.
Oh, well, nobody's perfect.
There you go.
Next question.
Thank you. What are the largest impediments having the dialogue between industry and government? For example, policy, laws, trust, maybe some others?
I have an idea, but I'd like to hear
I was
yours.
going to say, you've been in this business longer than I have. Please, for instance.
Well, it's the trust issue, and it goes both ways, is what I hear on an ongoing basis. Industry's not sure that what the government is telling them, particularly when it comes to requirements, is what they're actually going to have to be able to build. That's an acquisition thing much more than a technology issue. And the government's not sure that industry is telling them what the solution really is. They wonder whether industry is selling them something rather than helping them solve a problem. So not just from that list, but overall, that'd be my first choice.
Yeah, I think in my perspective, I mean, I just think misunderstanding comes into play so often when you look at these things. Just as an anecdote, I mean, I distinctly recall, again, going to the Japanese culture and the learning experience I had at Sony. It irked me quite deeply, the cultural differences with which women are treated in Japanese culture versus men and in the company. And I had this bright female on the team who stood out for her performance, and I made the point in front of all our male colleagues, I'm going to make a big production, give her an award when she visits the US. And so I present this award to her. I misunderstood the culture. I didn't realize it's not a culture about individuals, it's about teams. I actually shunned her from the pack. It was like the most embarrassing moment of her life, getting an individual award in front of her team members from somebody in my position. And there are just endless anecdotes that I have from my own experience of just misunderstanding of the seat in which the other sits. And I think, in particular, as I talk to our federal business partners here and look at the relationship with the Department of Defense, where the best successes come and the best partnerships come and delivering real solutioning and being successful is when the two sides genuinely understand, the whys about why people are doing something and, what the lens is through which they look at it. I just think too often people aren't willing to listen and actually understand, why the other side of the table is doing what they do and willing to understand, the seat they sit in. I just think every day, misunderstanding gets in the way.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's at the core of the trust issue that I talked about a moment ago, is just not being willing or able, whatever the reason may be, to understand where you live, and you being able to understand where I live and what I need to do to deliver to the people that expect me to deliver for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Next question.
Thank you. Are you addressing the need to not only merge cyber and physical security, but additionally HR-type data that might provide additional insider threat data?
Yeah, so for obvious reasons, I won't get into the specifics of our insider threat program at Dell or others I've run, but I can say that we literally have hundreds of data sources that go into a system, actually a system created by a defense contractor, talking about innovation coming out of the defense industry. And I want to say a third, potentially at least a quarter of those data sources are coming from HR. It's coming from personnel actions, it's coming from insights into when somebody's going to be termed, when they get performance reviewed. All that stuff is very, very valuable in looking at why human beings make the decisions they do, or increasing the likelihood that they're going to make a bad choice on a given day. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, HR data is critical. But again, if we're looking at standing up an insider threat program, being successful with it, of course the lawyers go nuts, because lawyers, are there to go nuts. But HR also took some...
Three lawyers in the room laughed at that.
Yeah, there we go. I don't know how you got away with only having three. HR took some education, right? To be successful, you got to, again, have HR understand why do you need this data that they consider their crown jewels, that they take pride in protecting the privacy and protecting the integrity and the protection of their data, and actually giving it over to some people that, want to spy on their employees who they're, sitting there, mandated to protect. And so regardless of the program, small or big, again, going back to common understanding what the mission is, what you're trying to achieve, working together to recognize each other's equities, maybe shielding some of the fields in that HR data that comes over because you really don't need it, but it means a lot to HR and what their equities are, and finding common ground and delivering solutioning and delivering it quickly, and not sitting and studying something to death, but producing results and getting something done.
Is there a role maybe for an expanded automation process in analyzing that data to provide some comfort to the HR folks that are worried about humans sitting there and looking at vast quantities of this data?
Oh yeah, and I mean, this is something I'm happy to share as a best practice and we're proud of. I mean, anonymization, tokenization, all these techniques that are out there that have been for years to be applied in security practice in very effective ways. Our insider threat program, nobody ever sees who's being studied until the very end, until you need to physically find out who it is and bring them in a room, and then it's one person, and then it's multiple people overseeing it. So there's always ways to consider, again, the equities of the lawyers, the equities of the privacy experts, the equities of the HR folks. But increasingly also, and one of the exciting trends for me over the last couple of years has been not having to even have humans in the process. I mean, if we look at what has been happening just over the last 12 to 24 months with innovations coming in the space of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the math and the algorithms behind that, it's incredible. And increasingly, I'm seeing amongst my peers and even in Dell's shop, some of our most effective programs are coming out of innovations that don't have a human in the loop, and those are the quickest also. When you look at our endpoint solutions, actually, and it's not a Dell product per se, going with Cylance on the endpoint, machine learning is just incredible. When you program a machine, to do things that security professionals may take longer to do, what can happen, and the insights that machines can glean that humans can't. So I think there's a ton of innovation coming out of that space.
AI and machine learning are maybe two of the most popular buzzwords in the technology field right now.
Yep.
How do we utilize them practically and prevent them from just being shiny buzzwords that people go, I want to do that because everybody's using artificial intelligence?
Yeah, there's always a buzzword of the year or the month,
Sure.
isn't there? Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of a results-oriented guy, right? So I think everybody ought to be in the demand to see, like Jerry Maguire, show me the money, show me the data, show me the results. I mean,
Do we know what we're looking for results, or are we still early enough in AI that we're really trying to figure out the complex ways to be able to use it to its fullest potential? And machine learning the same way.
So I think that the amount that has been defined as the realm of the possible with AI is large enough where we have a lot of meat on that bone. I think undoubtedly there are going to be for years to come applications that we can't even imagine right now. But certainly, and even in the cybersecurity space, there are applications on the network security end, endpoint security end, where we're doing things defensively using, again, just pure machine learning AI techniques that we in terms of effectiveness and objectives and outcomes, we could not achieve at that speed just a few years ago. And so I think it has been proven out. Like anything else, though, when you walk the floor of RSA conference, you got 1,500 people squawking in your ear, and everybody's got the answer. There's a host of abysmal failures out there, but undoubtedly people have implemented over the last few years applications where it is making a difference. And again, I mean, Dell, in our endpoint security solutioning, we chose Cylance to package on the Dell endpoint because it's just friggin' effective. When we looked at the WannaCry attack that just happened, you rewound that attack a year, and you applied Cylance machine learning against it on Dell's endpoint, and it was stopped a year earlier using a year-old technology. So I mean, it's just the results are compelling when applied properly. But of course, there's a lot of noise out there too.
The government takes a lot of criticism for its cybersecurity posture overall, and in some cases that criticism is warranted. Homeland Security was pretty active in describing after WannaCry that this didn't affect us the way that it affected some private sector organizations. Why do you think that was? I mean, they made it sound like, well, we have all our patches up to date, and that was pretty much the end of it. And that may have been the end of it. What do you think?
So I will say that one thing that the Defense Department, the government increasingly in general has learned earlier than probably industry is just how much good hygiene and the basics matter. And it doesn't take necessarily employing sexy solutions all the time, but patching matters, vulnerability management matters, and I know having been DoD and for decades, there's been entire teams, organizations focused on just getting software patching right. And so it doesn't necessarily surprise me that generally the government did well from a patching perspective. Also, when you look at defense in depth and the defense in depth architectures that, again, I'm more familiar with the DoD has produced, WannaCry exploited over network, over ports and protocols that generally have many layers between where an attack point is going to come in and hit a DoD endpoint or a federal endpoint. So that's not surprising, whereas some particularly small and medium-sized businesses don't have the knowledge or the resources, the wherewithal to get there. The one thing I would caution, though, is I think increasingly, the government, but DoD in particular, has taken a very historically perimeter-oriented approach to cybersecurity, which has been fairly effective. But as increasingly we're looking to bring data, bring decision-making to the warfighter, to the edge, to the endpoint, and not a traditional endpoint, but tablets and custom hardware devices and everything else, increasingly the security boundary that's going to matter most is the data layer, right? And it's not going to matter anything in between, but you need to wrap a very tight boundary of protection around that data and around the identity. And so, I think on private industry, the same trend is happening, but particular relevance to the government, who has a very strong defense in depth boundary-oriented historical architecture. I think increasingly we need to evolve to a point where we're following the data with the protection, with the access decision-making that needs to happen. And I think that's the trend and the direction we're heading.
Next question, please.
Thank you. What are some of the biggest challenges facing Dell as a global enterprise as related to security of systems?
So all the same ones that you all have. We're big. We're nowhere near as big as DoD. We're probably bigger than most federal agencies. We're about 200,000 employees. But more so than size, and I think even certainly at Sony, certainly at the Defense Department, complexity and diversity. Complexity is just a security killer. It's just damn hard to protect things that are different. And so, like any big business, big enterprise, Dell is constantly buying, constantly changing, trying to make sure that we're bringing the latest and greatest to bear for our customers. As a result, we've got companies like EMC coming in with totally different network, totally different systems. EMC owns VMware, totally different systems and networks. VMware owns AirWatch. These are all systems that I need to make sure we keep the security on. But again, just like many of you, very complex, very large enterprises, and finding ways to, again, focus on the fundamentals, bring best practices to bear. One of the learnings for me, in particular at Sony, is you don't try to protect everything the same. And that was really extremely obvious. But when you actually operationalize that, a true revelation, and really focusing on what matters the most, what can do the most damage to you and your customers. Again, focus on our supply chain, on our products, making sure that the integrity and the assurance of what we're delivering is extremely secure. And if things get hit, day by day, hour by hour on the other edges of the empire, and it's not our customers' information, our employees' information, or stuff that can affect the integrity of our business and our business assurance, then I almost don't care about it. And so, we face all the same problems. I'd say, from my perspective, we've been grappling with them in probably a more prioritized manner, at least than I think most have historically, where you have a security policy, you do these things, and you do it everywhere. And from a Dell perspective, we really prioritize those things that affect the integrity and the assurance of our supply chain.
You kind of anticipated my next question. You tipped your hand a little bit, but that's okay. You made a comment a moment ago when it comes to prioritizing what to protect, what can do the most damage to you and your customers. Is that the number one question that you ask when you're making that decision, prioritizing stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way I look at it is, everybody looks at security differently. If you're in my legal department, you're looking at what's going to get us sued or what's going to get us fined by the regulators. If you're in, marketing and sales, you're looking at what's going to impact our brand and make us look like fools. If you're in the factories, looking at the cost per box, and every second of a box of Dell going off the supply line to a customer matters, and you're measuring every second, you're looking at our operational assurance. The reality is from a security perspective, you're managing the risk, but across a really diverse array of consequences. And so from my perspective, I see probably 4 or 5 big areas of impact that mean really significant things to the business, but for totally different reasons. And then if you just work your entire program and your approach back from those impact areas, you can almost immediately have a self-prioritizing list of where your focus should be. So I care a hell of a lot about our factories. I care an incredible amount about the personal information that we keep on our systems and networks, for totally different reasons. But when you work, again, off those impacts, again, aligned to the company's vision, the company's values, then it becomes easy to focus on what matters.
How are we doing on time?
We have time for just one more question. With the pace of technical innovation, how are you addressing technical education of your staff?
Give us a quick one, thumbnail on that, if you would, please.
Man, the biggest problem in cybersecurity, in my perspective, is so hard to find, develop, and keep people, and there's far more demand than supply. And so all I can say is we've made a concerted effort at it. I mean, if you look at my strategic plan for the year, and it's broken into 6 pillars, one of them is entirely focused on workforce development and workforce management. It means engaging with universities. It means training mid-career professionals. It means, again, educating on HR, why the typical HR constraints and market data and things you shouldn't be constrained with if you want to be successful in your mission. And you got to be creative, because the standard approach is going to leave you without the people you need.
John Scimone of Dell, I want to thank you very much for your time to sit and talk to us today. I want to thank AFCEA for the invitation to come and be with you, and thank you very much for your attention, and have a great rest of the event.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lieutenant General Bob Wood back to the stage to formally thank Mr. Scimone and Mr. Rose on behalf of AFCEA and our audience.
Well, thank you very much, John and Francis, for joining us here today. I would mention that in lieu of a speaker gift, AFCEA will make a donation to Fisher House on your behalf. Thank you very much for being here with us and offering your insights. We're going to, in fact, have a workforce panel coming up. General Zabel will be working with that tomorrow. So we're, I think, touching all the bases. We do appreciate the insights as it related to the complicated enterprise that Dell runs worldwide, just as the Defense Department. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now moving into networking break on the exhibit floor, where dessert, sponsored by Fortinet, will be served. Be sure to visit some of the booths that you haven't yet visited. The theaters will be running. You can see on the screen those that will be ongoing, and there'll be a great exchange of ideas going on in each of those. Finally, the Cyber Innovation Showcase will also be taking place. Make sure to take advantage of those professional development opportunities. We'll see you back here at 3 o'clock for a fireside chat. We'll try to find a fire if we can, on acquisition and innovation agility with Ms. Margie Graves, the acting federal CIO, and Mr. Alfred Rivera, the Director of DISA's Development and Business Centers. Thank you for your attention.